Okay, so I'm super excited for you all to check this part out because this is something that Trey and I are both super passionate about, which is, when people come to faith, it's a Holy Spirit process, but just like a lot of things in the church, the Holy Spirit uses means, and you're one of the means he uses to help people connect in faith. But people aren't a project, like we've said, and it's not always an immediate thing. And I think sometimes we want it to be immediate, so we feel like it's a fail if we share the gospel or we share faith and somebody doesn't immediately connect to Jesus and want to get baptized right there on the spot. But Trey, I think you have a really helpful way of thinking about this. And I love the title because it's just sticky. It's positive Christian bumps. So what do you mean when you're talking about positive Christian bumps, and where does that kind of come from?
Yeah, so a positive Christian bump is really just a positive interaction that someone who's disconnected has with a Christian that kind of pushes them, bumps them just a little bit closer to faith. Sometimes a positive Christian bump can bump them really far, but sometimes it's just a little nudge. The place that this came from was, I've always had a passion to share the gospel with people. And I wasn't always a Christian. I became a Christian in my mid to late 20s, but I did grow up in the church, and I was a pastor's kid. And when I was 16 years old, I got hurt by the church pretty bad. And so when I turned 18, I ran from God. I ran from the church. I hit the road as a touring musician, and I spent 10 years touring all over the country. Got almost famous twice. And then, after the second band exploded, I found myself in my mid to late 20s with zero job skills except for singing and playing guitar.
Apparently, touring musician is not easy to put on a resume.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't get you too many jobs. And so I ended up finding myself teaching guitar lessons at the very last place I ever wanted to be. And that was at a church. Growing up in the church, I knew how to blend in a little bit. And so I put on my church mask. And,
you learn the language, you know what you say, you know what you don't say.
Yeah. I wasn't fooling anybody. But what happened was, over the next 3 years, my students and their parents, these were just everyday disciples, they treated me with honor, dignity, and respect. They loved me. They cared about me. They would come in and check in, see how I'm doing. And it sounds kind of weird, but the most impactful thing that they did was they gave me Christmas presents at Christmas. And it just showed me that they cared. And over those 3 years, each one of those interactions was a positive Christian bump that slowly chipped away at the wall I built between myself and God, until eventually, I surrendered to what the Holy Spirit was doing in my life through these people. But the thing is, it wasn't like one epic conversation. And in fact, there were occasionally, it was usually pastors and church workers that would come in and try to have the gospel conversation with me. And that would actually push me back a little bit sometimes.
Well, I remember talking to you about that because, pastors, you feel this pressure. It's like, okay, I have to have this conversation, this person needs Jesus. Yeah, they do, but, at the right time. That's why we did the stoplight video earlier in the training.
But these people, they were just being a reflection of Jesus. They were being who God created them to be in Jesus, and they loved on me. And so, moving forward, I'm a Christian. I'm getting involved in ministry. I'm trying to share the gospel, wanting to have spiritual conversations with people. But I felt like I needed to get people from zero all the way to faith and get them over the finish line. And it was actually getting discouraging because I was having these spiritual conversations with people, but I wasn't seeing fruit. And then I was like, man, I'm so frustrated. I've got to think about this differently. And I was like, so what took a rock and roll guy and turned him into a Christian? And I realized that it was a series of positive interactions from lots of people. And so I decided to call it a positive Christian bump. And so that changed my strategy. So instead of me trying to get somebody across the finish line, in that moment when I'm interacting with someone, my goal is to be a positive Christian bump. And that's something that I can measure. That's something I know when I've been one, and I definitely know when I'm not one. But what, and now I've been doing this long enough now, you don't always see the fruit of it, but I've been doing it long enough to where I've had people over the course of time that have come back to me and said, that time when we had that conversation, that made such a difference in my life. And it was one of the pivotal moments that helped bring me to faith. Even though, and some of the times I'd totally even forgotten that those moments had happened. And so the Holy Spirit works through these positive Christian bumps, because I guess the real key is I'm not the Holy Spirit. You're not the Holy Spirit.
It's recognizing that you're not responsible for the process, you're a partner in the process. I think there's this great line, it talks about -10 to person of peace. And if you think about, a person's journey to faith, you could think about it as like a -10, I'm totally disconnected, no desire for the church, maybe even hostile to the church, -10, all the way up to a person of peace. And so if you were to put that on a timeline and think about that, positive Christian bumps is a great way to express the reality that God allows us to partner with Him at different points in people's story. And so when you realize that you're not responsible for the process, but you're partnering in the process, you can kind of sit back and think, I don't know where this person is in their journey. I don't know what bump, they need, but if the Holy Spirit's inviting me in, and if that nudge just moves them from a -10 to a -9, that's a win, That's a huge thing, because the Holy Spirit is using you in His divine wisdom, in His divine process, to be a part of somebody moving in faith. Because we have to remember that faith is not something we do in somebody, because it's not something we do in ourselves, but rather it's the Holy Spirit that creates faith within us. And He partners with us to be able to be a part of that in somebody else's life. So realize that track and that trajectory, when you think about positive Christian bumps, it could be a relationship you have with somebody. It could be a good thing you've done in somebody's life, or just how you've been able to serve them, or even how you've allowed them to serve you. These can all be interactions that lead to somebody having a different picture of who Jesus is and actually being able to come to faith in Him. So I love the positive Christian bumps. I think it's a great way to think about it. And so think about how you can be a positive Christian bump in somebody's life, and then when they open the opportunity to share faith, then give credit where credit's due, and the credit goes to God. And that's how people start to connect in faith.
Yeah, so there's really just a couple of principles, guiding principles for positive Christian bumps. And the first is to realize that you're not the Holy Spirit. You can't save anybody. I can't save anybody. No, Matt, you are not the Holy Spirit.
I'm not the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it's above our pay grade.
Yeah.
We don't have that in our power. What our job is it goes to the great commandment. We're supposed to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. And when we love our neighbor out of the love of God, they get to experience God's love through us. We do our part, which is to love them and to disciple them, and and to just help them to experience God's love. And then we trust that the Holy Spirit is going to work faith in their life, using my positive Christian bump and your positive Christian bump and the positive Christian bumps from people that you've never even met, to bring this person into a saving relationship with Jesus Christ.